Well, for more on the talks between Biden and Putin, as well as Russia's economy, let's bring in Yuval Weber. He's a research assistant professor at Texas A&M's Bush School of Government and Public Service. He joins us here in Washington, D.C. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So first, what are your impressions of the Biden-Putin dynamic?
Well, it's certainly, there were very low expectations going in, and they were wildly successful by those very low standards. As you suggested earlier, they focused on what are the very small things that can be done more or less in the next 6 months, which is return ambassadors to the respective capitals, open recently closed embassies and consulates, and thinking about prisoner exchange, and think also about how to start strategic stability talks, which, as President Biden said, is a euphemism for getting back to talking about nuclear weapons. So in context, yeah, so they got all the little things done to work towards making a more cooperative relationship in the future.
So then how does their rapport compare to that Trump had with Putin?
Excuse me, what was that?
How does the relationship that Biden has with Putin compare to what Trump had with Putin?
Oh, so sure. So Biden is the first U.S. president since the end of the Cold War, going back all the way to Clinton, who does not actually need Russia for any specific diplomatic initiative. Clinton was about NATO enlargement. Bush was combating international terrorism. Obama about nonproliferation. Trump was about the U.S. getting out of the Middle East. All the things that Biden wants to do, primarily on getting back into the Iran nuclear deal, climate change, things like that, those are already in Russia's interests. So Biden is basically much less dependent on Putin than the previous presidents that Putin has dealt with. So in that sense, beyond the personality issues in which Trump was really looking for the approval and friendship of Putin in sort of an uncertain and still unexplained way, that we have two different approaches to Putin. Biden certainly has much more experience and is a much more seasoned politician and has worked in politics for a long time, and he doesn't really need Putin. And that's essentially what was able to provide him the opportunity to deal with Putin from a much less unequal position relative to what Trump did.
So as we look at what came out of the meeting and the conferences, we know that one topic of conversation was, of course, the recent cyber attacks on U.S. industries. What was Russia's response to those allegations?
So complete denial. One of the things that Putin said in his press conference afterwards is that there's more cybercrime in America than anywhere else in the world, just complete deflection. And President Putin, he's probably the world's champion at whataboutism. So in that context, he didn't admit any of the cybercrime that has happened in the United States has come from Russia. What the intelligence services in the United States have said is that these are private cyber criminals who are working with the tacit approval of the security services in Russia, in the sense that they're going after ransom, they're going after money, but they're going after these civilian infrastructure in America with the intelligence services in Russia knowing and permitting it to happen. And that, in the clip that you played, ahead of this interview, is what Biden was referring to, in the sense that he could basically unleash his security services or unleash his criminals, if he had contact with them, in the way that would really disrupt the way that normal people live in Russia. Like in the larger sense, big countries try to steal each other's information all the time. That's just sort of normal espionage. But what has really changed the tone here in Washington is all of these ransomware attacks against the things that normal people look forward to. Filling their car with gas,
Right.
Getting hamburgers, things like that. That's the sort of stuff that Biden was trying to say is off limits, and use that as the basis for further negotiations going forward.
And certainly as a big oil producing company, we know that quote obviously would have hit home. So then how would you characterize Russia's overall economic performance in oil and other things in terms of its strengths as well as the concerns?
So it's a mixed bag in the Russian economy. Certainly the burgeoning recovery of the international economy is good because it means more people are going out, more demand for the natural resources that Russia exports. But what's also happening in Russia is that there's a lot of stress on the average consumer. As you mentioned earlier, it's not only has the inflation rate reached 5.5% month, according to the Russian finance minister. The latest data that were released today showed that it's gone above 6%. So, and those are most felt in foodstuffs as well as in gas, like benzene. And in both of those critical sectors, the Russian government has started to impose price controls just to know what is the impact, not on the big producers, but on regular everyday people. There's also been, over the last few years, much greater income inequality and a much greater falls in per capita incomes, not just in the purchasing power in terms of buying foreign goods through exchange rates, but also the price of the actual ruble itself. The value of the currency has gone down. So people are getting poorer, not being able to buy as much, even if the energy exporters are doing better than they used to. And that's what shows up in the GDP figures. Because these really big enterprises and natural resource exporters take up such a dominant share of the GDP, we can see that that's going well. Even for regular people, it's not.
All right, well, we do appreciate your insights. Yuval Weber there, Research Assistant Professor at Texas A&M's Bush School of Government and Public Service. Thank you so much.